So I'm Rikard Edgren. I work for TIBCO Spotfire. I sit in Gothenburg's office, and I'm going to talk about more and better test IDs. And I have two messages. The first one is that I want you all to use more test IDs to test far beyond all the explicit requirements. And the second is that if you write down these test IDs in short sentences, that will be a very effective method. This approach I'm talking about was sort of invented and refined at my workplace by my colleagues and myself. But it has been at many other places as well. So it's nothing really new, but hopefully it can be new to some of you. There are also a lot of good talking around test IDs by Ken Kainer, James Bach, and Michael Bolton. Not so much about documenting and reviewing test IDs, but very much and good things about how to think. There is also a paper about this with more details and references, and I think you can get hold of it on the EuroSTAR site pretty soon. The agenda is we talk about some definitions of test IDs. I will give you two examples of test IDs. We will talk about how to generate more test IDs, how to make the test IDs better, and we end with a summary. The first definition of test ID comes from Brian Merrick, who said that it's a brief statement of something that should be tested. I like this. Maybe I would have stated that it's something that could be tested, because you never know if you will actually execute the test ID. The next definition comes from ISTQB. Test condition, an item or event of a component or system that could be verified by one or more test cases. That is, a function, transaction, feature, quality attribute, or structural element. This one is a bit too formal for my taste. It sounds like it's something that needs to be true or false, and I like test IDs to be able to be a bit more vague, to investigate things. Also, this term condition is not so easy to understand right away. So test ID is a lot better, and I hope that ISTQB can change to test ID very soon. Next one is from Rational Unified Process, test IDs list, an enumerated list of IDs, often partially formed, that identify potentially useful tests to conduct. And it shouldn't be a surprise that test IDs are included in Rational Unified Process, because everything is included there. The next one we have is from Ken Kainer. A test ID is the thought that guides our creation of a test. And James Bach says, test ID, an ID for testing something. And the last one is really nice because it indicates that maybe we don't need a definition, because you immediately understand what a test ID is. In this presentation, what I mean with a test ID is all of this, but also that it's documented somewhere, so it's written down. The first example is a spare time project from Canada. It's a test specification I wrote this summer for a tool for exploratory testers that they use to write down things while testing. And I used it for some beta testing. This is a product that's not ready yet, but it might become very good in the future. And at EuroSTAR, where I had this presentation, I read all these IDs out loud, but we won't do it here. So all of you can read all of these IDs as fast as you can, starting now. as you could see, there were many different types of test studies. Some of them were quite generic, and some were very detailed about some specific functionality. And you could also see that the 53 test studies, I tried to cover the most important aspects of these small products. And in just 3 minutes, it's possible to read all of these and get an idea of what will be tested. And if you would have known about the product, it would also be possible for you to see what is missing from this test specification. Also, when executing these test studies, it's a good idea to combine several of them, to use them together. For instance, there was one test study about use the product on an error-prone machine with high DPE and many different settings. That's something you would like to do for a long time while you execute many of the other tests at the same time. And by combining several tests, you get more complicated scenarios, and there is a better chance of something interesting happening. Also, when I created this list, there was a previous version available, so it was very efficient to make this list while I was trying out the software. But we need a short break and talk about scripted testing and exploratory testing. This is quite rich terminology, and they are used in many different ways. They can be used to mean approaches to software testing, where scripted testing is something that focuses on control and precision, to be able to plan what you are going to do, to know how far you have reached with all your tests and when you will be completed. Exploratory testing focuses more on learning and the freedom and responsibility of the tester to come up with good things to test and to see what is interesting. But these terms can also be used for methods, activities, techniques, where scripted testing is to design and review tests in advance, and exploratory testing is to design and execute tests simultaneously. I think it's important to know that the terminology can be used in different ways because there are interesting combinations of these things. For instance, if you run scripted testing as a method, it could be either with a scripted testing approach because you run them in order to control all the testing you're doing. But you could also run scripted tests and use them as a baseline for further testing. And then you would do scripted testing but with an exploratory approach. The test ideas I talk about, they don't belong to either scripted testing or exploratory testing. They can be used in both environments to enable early feedback, to add visibility, to save time. But especially for exploratory testing, it can be good to have as a checklist, to know that you are going to complete everything you think you need to complete in order to tell how good the product is doing. Now we'll go to a picture that might be difficult for you to understand. So I will try to explain this. We have a square here in the middle. This symbolizes the requirements and all the tests that you could run, that you write from the requirements, and all the bugs that you will find by executing these tests from the requirements. The big blue area is the area for all bugs, everything that could be found about the product. And this area is huge. There are so many things that you don't know much about. But we are lucky because not everything is important. So this brown area is the area where all important bugs can be found. But this is still a lot larger than the requirements. So how do we go from the requirements to looking at everything that's important? We can't write test scripts for everything because that would take too much time. We could do some exploratory testing, which is symbolized by these lines. Do some exploratory testing here and there and hope for the best. But we could do more written down test ideas that are reviewed. So we know that we think we can capture what's important about the product. We would still need some luck, but I think we have a much better chance of finding everything that's important by using these one-liners to go from the requirements to everything that's important. Sometimes people have questions about this image. The first time I showed it, a colleague said, "Do you know that it looks like a potato?" And yeah, I think he was right there. It looks a bit like a potato. So what I'm talking here about today is to find the whole potato and to examine it. Example number 2 comes from this office where I sit right now in Gothenburg, Sweden. And I asked my colleagues if they had a good example of a test specification that I could use in this presentation. And a colleague said that, well, basically, you could use any one I have written. That's not so strange to say something like that, because he's actually a member of the best and most humble test team in the world. But in the end, I used one of my own test specifications. It's from last year, and it was used for a 1.0 release. And it was a good starting point for next releases of this new thing we were building. So I will show you some test ideas that we're using, so you guys can see what it could look like. And I'll let you read this for yourself. Maybe you wonder why it says only do a sanity check of calculation of mean. And the reason is that there also are unit tests that do more thorough testing of the actual calculation. Here we have test item, which is an inheritage of IEEE. And the tests here are very generic and could be seen more as reminders of what to think about during the testing. Many of these are also something you could call ongoing test IDs. That stability and user interface is something you should think about all the time when testing. You have some vague test IDs and some very vague test IDs. And in this example, you could convert all these IDs to detailed test scripts and add all the necessary details, so anyone could execute the test. Or you could try to execute them as is and trust the tester to design the tests and choose the thoroughness of the testing. So, how do we generate more test IDs? As I've said, looking at the requirements aren't enough. There are so many implicit requirements, and there are many incorrect requirements as well. And it would be almost insane to try to document everything in a requirements document. But what you can do is to look at every part of the product and every part that it interacts with something else and think about what should be right, what can go wrong, what quality attributes matter, and also what is important, because we can't test everything. And you have to be creative and also to work hard. For each test ID, there are 2 more. This statement is of course not always true, but sometimes it is. But I also think that you just don't come up with these new test IDs out of the blue. Often you have input of many different types, and you use them in combinations to come up with things that are interesting and important to test. And I call these things test ID triggers. And of course you have the requirements and other specifications. Maybe you have a prototype. You can also look at the code, if that's possible, and help you. And you probably have a bug system with a lot of information regarding quality. Mistakes that have been made before might very well happen again. Maybe you have gathered the most important types of defects in an error catalog. What the customers tell the support department is very important information. You should talk to the support people about what they see and hear. But not all customers will tell you about the problems. Some won't bother to report things, especially non-blocking but annoying things. And those that never bought your software because of something they didn't like, they won't tell you either. The more you know about the technology, the more you know about what can be done and what shouldn't be done. And there are many tools out there, and some might give you new ideas. Maybe a test ID can be to use a tool in a certain way. By looking at the system as a whole, you can see how your product fits in a bigger picture. And you should also be aware that your box, your product, is just a small part of the whole system, what the customer is trying to accomplish. You should also think about interactions, how different things interact. There are many errors over here. And you can also build models of your system. Not only one, you can build several models. Because if you understand how the product can work, you can also understand how it can fail. There are many testing techniques, and if you learn these very good, you can create more and better tests. Most of you are actually using testing techniques, but you aren't aware of it. But if you are aware of them, it can generate better things. Maybe you also have test IDs lists that have been used for other products. You can read them and get input and get new ideas. And last but not least, we have people. Talk to your colleagues, talk to developers, talk to different persons that have information about the product. What is important? What have to work? What could fail? And we also have the tester's own subjectivity, knowledge, and experience. And some of you might think that, well, shouldn't testers be objective? But I think subjectivity is something good, because the customers will be subjective. So maybe we should be a bit subjective too. And also the subjectivity helps us to understand what is important. To give you a bit more details, I will talk about my favorite test ID triggers. These are quality attributes. It's a Kruspik Stempel list from Bach & Bolton's Rapid Software Testing course. And the ones in bold are the ones that I have great use of when coming up with new test IDs. Capability is not bold because that's the functionality and that has been covered in other ways. But reliability, that's something that's good to think about. That the software works all the time, not only under ideal circumstances. And what things can make it more difficult for the software to work. Also, usability is important, and it's getting more and more attention. And there are many aspects of usability. Often it's about if the product is easy to learn and to use for the first time. But I think it's equally important that the product is fast and efficient to work with the 100th time you're using it. So you can save time but not having to repeat many things all the time. Security is also important. Scalability. If it works for one item, will it work for 1,000 items? Performance is something you might have in your requirements document. It might be stated that this and that should work for 1,000 users at the same time. But there are also performance in the small to think about. For instance, every time you launch a dialog, you expect it to pop up on the screen pretty fast. And if it takes a second or two, your confidence of the product is a bit worse. And if that happens many times, maybe you don't trust the product as well anymore. So performance can be on many areas. Installation is of course important. Upgrading, uninstallation. Compatibility with other products, with previous versions of the product, with operating systems, with standards, and many other things. Next comes supportability, testability, maintainability, portability, and localizability. And these are often more thought about how to look at the code, if the code is easy to maintain or port. But it could also be thought about the product, about the customers. How will they support the usage of your product? How can they maintain all the artifacts that your product produces? I have put localizability in bold here because that's something we do at our company. Maybe you don't, so you don't need to bother. Some additions to the cross-pick stempel is accessibility, which is that the software can be used by all types of users. For instance, colorblind people, 10% of men, should they be able to use the product fully? People with hearing impairments, could they have problems? To think about all different types of users, how they can use the product. This is often a part of usability, but I think it's worth a bullet point. With interoperability, I mean that the product can work with other things, that it can do things that others act on, and vice versa. Some more favorites. It's often very efficient, at least at my place, to delete things, to remove things, to use empty and null, so the software gets confused. I also like to read the manual. Even though I know the product inside out, when I read a new manual, I suddenly realize, oh, you're supposed to be able to do that as well. You get new ideas while reading the manual. And at the same time, you're testing the manual. I also think it's important to look at all deliverables. Not only to look at how the product behaves when it's installed, because often you have a lot of extra README files and stuff that's included when you install the product. Many types of information that's important or might not be important. Maybe there is too much information in these extra documents. A mail address that shouldn't be read by the customers. I also like to use the same data and document for a very long time, so you know that the product can be used many years. For instance, this PowerPoint presentation, I expect to be able to use it for years and to change it, to save it, to upgrade to different versions, to have the same document that can live for a long time and have many different properties inside it. And the last favorite is to try to do some real usage of your product. If it's possible to use it internally as a tool for your own work, that's great. Some people call it eat your own dog food. Other people call it drink your own champagne. You can choose what you prefer. But it's very good if you can use the product for real, because then you will understand what you can do with it and what parts can be important. So how do we get better test studies? Well, it's basically the same. That's what you have for test cases. So this list comes from Kemkina's What is a Good Test Case? That a test case is better if it's more powerful, has the ability to find bugs. Same goes for test studies. They should yield significant results. They should be credible. They should be likely. And test cases should be easy to evaluate. I put this in italic because I don't think that fits for test studies. Because test studies can be more vague and you don't really know what the expected result is. For a test case you have the expected results and you can pass or fail. But the test study can be more difficult to evaluate, and that's okay. But a test study that's useful for troubleshooting is better than a test study that can't be used for that. an informative test study is good. A test study with the appropriately complex level. So it's not too easy or not too difficult. If the test study can give insightful information, that's good. And then some additions to this list. That the test study is easy to understand. Because since the test studies are so fast to read, you can distribute them to many people. And these people might not know so much about testing or the details. So if you can write the test studies so they are easy to understand for many people, that's better because you will get better feedback. And also that the test study is fast to execute because then you can execute more of them. We should also remember Kem Kaner's advice that test cases can't be good in all of these ways at the same time. They are good in some, and some others are good at other things. Test studies also get better through collaboration. You shouldn't work too long yourself with things. Rather, you should give the test studies to someone else and get feedback. What could be improved? The feedback gets better if you get it from people that care and understand what's important about the product. And you should try to get feedback from many sources. The development team, but also other stakeholders. Maybe even customers you trust. The more the better. And also don't be afraid to discard test studies that seem weaker, because we can't perform all tests. So if something doesn't seem really powerful or will take too long time, maybe you just can skip it. And you should also note that test studies can get better depending on how you use them. Some test studies might be perfect for a unit test. Others are more appropriate for manual exploratory testing. And some others may be a part of a larger scenario. And finally, you will also get better test studies when you learn more about the product. You can go back and improve the test studies and improve your testing and the test results. We have used the test studies for maybe 5 or 6 years at our company. And my experience is that there are many different types of test studies. Some are very detailed and some are very vague. But common to them is that the one-liners are very fast to read. And they are very easy to update because it's not too much information. And I like them when they are pretty vague, so you leave freedom for the test designer or the test executor to do what they think is appropriate with the knowledge they have. Also, the test studies are useful right now when you write them for your project, but they can also be used later for the next version or for a similar product that can use your test study list as input. The test study is not only useful for yourself, they can also be useful for other people. Maybe the developers can get insights by reading your test studies, so they don't introduce the bugs in the first place. Managers can read test studies and understand more about the actual testing that is going to be performed. You can even have stakeholders who can have a say about the testing that's done. And also that the readers can see what testing will be performed, and they can make sure that no important thing is missing. Also, you should adjust the granularity of your test studies for better readability. My experience says that it starts to get difficult if you have more than 100 test studies in a specification. You can either write test studies at a higher level, or maybe you can split it in several pieces. It depends. Now it's time for a picture. This is Find 5 Faults. Maybe you know about the game. So now it's time for you to write on the question and answers. What things are missing? Which are the five faults in this image? Maybe the question answer thing is difficult. Maybe the screen is difficult. I think you should see this. For instance, here you have a flower that's missing here. Here is a tail, which is missing here. We have part of Lily Scoot's ear that is missing. We have a monkey up here that's missing. And finally we have Skalman, who doesn't appear on the image to the left. Maybe we think now that, yeah, we found the 5 faults and we are done. But there are other things than these faults that are more important. For instance, does this picture come from a Bamse comic? That could be important. What happens on the strips before and after this slide? Is the picture a good part of the story? Does it help with what they are trying to tell in the comic? Is the picture consistent with the style of the story? Are they in the jungle before and after this happens? Are the right people on the picture? For instance, maybe Skalman died 2 pages ago. Then he shouldn't be here. And this is the same with software testing. We might focus on some very specific faults, but maybe there is something other that's much more important that we are missing. Of course, there are also limitations with these test studies. It's not a solution to everything. For instance, if you execute the test studies directly, the executors must have a lot of testing and product knowledge, and it might be difficult to evaluate the results anyway. I've also experienced some difficulties with getting good feedback. Some people really like the format and come up with more ideas, and others read the test study list and say, well, that looks good. But on the other hand, it's much easier to get feedback from test studies than from detailed test cases. Also, a little warning about generic test studies. Maybe you think that, yeah, we could write 40 test studies and then we use them for all the products. That might not be a good idea because you might obscure the new context. You might not think about what's most important for what you're testing right now. So rather I would recommend using generic test ID triggers that you can use for all the products. But you have to do the thinking each and every time for every new product. So, my summary is that many different test studies is a very good thing. We need to test the products in many different ways because the users will use the product in many, many different ways and in many, many different environments and with many, many different data sets. And if you write these test studies and make more people involved in the process, you will have better and more perspectives. And it doesn't have to take too much time either, because the test studies are fast to read, fast to write, and fast to update. So you could have them as an ongoing document throughout the whole product, or you could do them in advance. Or maybe you write the test studies at the same time as you execute the tests. And maybe test studies could be the glue you need for using test scripts and an exploratory testing approach. Maybe you can use test scripts for the requirements and test studies for everything else. Also, finally, to use these documented test studies, it's nothing very new, and it's quite a simple idea. It's just write in short format what you want to test. So it might seem like, yeah, we could do that, but why bother? I think that you need to use it for a while in order to understand the value of this, to see that it makes a lot of things a lot easier, especially the visibility, to get more people involved in what you are testing. And that's it for me. So now I wonder if you have any questions.
I see a question here from Nick Rikard.
Yeah?
He asked, where do you document your test ideas?
Yeah. We document them in Word documents as a test specification with long lists, long tables of one-liner test studies. and then we store them in our document storing system at the company. But I mean, you could do this in any way, actually. For instance, if you have a test case management system with detailed test cases, but you only write the title of the test case and you skip all the details, that would be one way to store the test studies. Or maybe you use Excel sheets, and for each line you have a column pass or fail. Then you also have the result there. Or maybe it's a quite small project, so you can write the test studies on a whiteboard. Maybe you already do that. There are many different ways. Use the one that suits you.
Excellent. Thank you, Rikard. If anyone else wants to ask a question, if they could hit the Q&A tab just towards the top left of their screen. If they click on that, they will see that they can just type in a question and hit ask, and we can get Rikard to answer it for you.
Here is a question from Annika. How do you document the test execution? Well, at my company, we take the test studies and then we write test scripts with detailed test steps. And we have a test management system, so we execute the tests in that system. So for us, the test studies is just an intermediate step that we use in order to get to the really good test studies, the really good test cases. So we have another system for documenting the test execution. Here's a question from Vanessa. Is it useful to create test studies as an input to the requirement specification? Yeah, I think it's a good idea. And actually that's a bit like how we started with this thing, because many years ago we reviewed the requirements very thoroughly and came up with things like, well, what would happen if that happens, and that, and think about that, and think about that. And after a while it was so many things, so you couldn't squeeze it in the requirements because it would become too much. And then it was a quite short step to, okay, but then we will have to add this in a list. Think about these items as well. Here is a question from Attila. You were talking about scripted tests and exploratory testing. Why not recording ET actions with a tool and have it as scripted testing for later use? Yes, that could be a solution. I guess you mean that you are using a capture replay tool or something else that captures what you're doing. But my experience is that capture and replay tools are too fragile, that they might work on the same machine at the same build, but if something changes in the environment or in the product, all these capture replay scripts will be broken. So it would take too much to automate, to maintain everything of these automated tests. And also, if you just record your exploratory testing actions, it gets too much information. I think when you write something down, that's the essence of what you have done. There's a thinking process that brings out what's most important. If you just record everything, there will be too much noise that can break something or might not, and it's very difficult to maintain. Here's a question from Peter. Once an ID has become a detailed script, do you remove it from the IDs list or do you retain it and cross-reference with the script? Also, do you keep a note of the IDs you don't use and the rationale for rejection? For the first one, we make really sure that all the IDs get through to the test script and review that, so we know that each item has been included. And there's also the test ID specification is approved, etc., so we know that they aren't changed. So we don't remove it, the IDs list. That's just a document to have later on if we need it. And regarding IDs we don't use, that can depend, but normally I would write a note in the document stating we didn't do this because of this and that reason. Maybe it took too long time to do the test, or more commonly, the product changed, so the test wasn't appropriate anymore. So, but we don't go through each test study after the project is completed and make sure that everything either is executed or has a very good rationale. Here is a question from Peter. How much time do you use for executing the test studies? Is there a guideline or a time estimate? Well, that of course depends a lot, but at our company, the test group, we do mostly manual testing, and the developers do the unit testing, and there are some automated in between that we both do, but most of our time is manual testing. And of course we want to perform as much time on the execution as possible. So we do a lot more executing than writing, but how much time? Well, it depends. And I cannot give a guideline or a time estimate. It depends too much. Here's a question from Miguel. Are you using Agile? And the question is that we do exactly the same as all other companies. We use both Agile and Waterfall. If yes, what's the relation between testers and developers? Are all of them giving inputs for test cases? Thanks. The relationship between testers and developers might depending on the product, but there are more developers than testers, that's for sure. And regarding giving input, the testers read all the test studies. So we are 8 testers in our group. Everyone has a good overview of everything we are doing and give input to the ideas. And for the developers, it's very different. Some of them read the list and make really good use of it when they are developing, and others have a lot of input to, you can test this, you can test that, extra input, and others are not that interested because they have other things they think are more important. So it depends. That was my last question on the list. Anyone else?
We have one more question there from Attila, Rikard.
Yes. Let me see if I can see it. My machine got slow.
Oh, no problem. I can call it out to you, Rikard.
Yeah, this is good because it's more details. It was to use the exploratory testing as scripted testing later on. Attila clarifies. No, I wasn't talking about capture and replay tools. I meant tools that help testers record the actions in words while doing exploratory testing. So later, she could use these test cases as scripted tests. Yeah, that I understand more. And the answer is, no, we don't use that at our company, because since we have done test scripts from these test studies, we already have these steps about what to do. So what we rather do is that we execute the test scripts, and then we think about more things to test, more actions to do, to use the test scripts as a baseline, but to explore more, depending on how much we think we need to do that. Sometimes, of course, the exploratory testing around a test script would generate very important things to test, and we can write new test scripts for those. And most of the time, it will generate a bug, and then the bug report includes the steps of how to execute it. But regarding tools to help record actions, no, I use a text editor. Here's a question from Peter. Do the test studies formulated for a project become a formalized part of the high-level test plan? That is, are they visible to a much wider audience before they become approved scripts? Yes, that they are visible to a much wider audience. They are visible to everyone that has access to our project's documents. Yeah, it's a formalized part of the high-level test plan. We do it for all our features. Right, test IDs first and then test scripts.
Excellent. Thank you, Rikard. I think that's, if anyone has any more questions, we can take them now. If not, we'll just give them a few moments just to see if anyone comes back with a question.
Yeah, or you can just mail me if you have some other question. That's okay.
Excellent. Yes, if you look on the bottom slide on the screen at the moment, you can get Rikard's email from there. Excellent. I'd just like to thank Rikard for an excellent webinar this morning. The webinar is now over, so if you could make sure just to disconnect from both the live meeting, which is the visual slides, and also the telephone, which is the audio. There will be a recording of this webinar available on the EuroSTAR website very shortly, and we will email each and every person that is registered for this webinar with details of how to view this webinar online. Again, thank you to Rikard, and thank you all for taking the time to attend this webinar this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you.